a half step down, 30 seconds in. And Michael had to choose, stop or cover. The house lights dimmed at the Chicago amphitheater and 8,000 people leaned forward. Behind him, his brothers took their marks. The band hit the downbeat. The reel-to-reel machine backstage fed the backing track through two massive speaker stacks, and the first verse rolled out clean. Michael sang the opening line and felt it lock. Tempo steady, pitch centered. 16 bars in, the song was already theirs. Then the tape began to drift. It wasn't sudden. The playback machine backstage had been running hot all week. The motor pulled just slightly slower, a quarter step, then a half. The instrumental track sagged, and the pitch dropped like a voice dragging through water. Michael heard it before the band did, before the front row noticed. He finished the line and his hand stopped mid-gesture. The band kept playing. The drums stayed locked to the original tempo, but the recorded horns and strings now sat a half step below where they'd started, and the gap widened with every measure. Michael's ear told him the truth in real time. The tape was failing, and nobody else knew yet. He glanced stage left. The tour manager stood in the wings with a clipboard, nodding along to a rhythm that no longer existed. Michael caught his eye and tapped two fingers against his own ear, their signal for a sound problem. The manager frowned, shook his head, mouthed the words, "Keep going." 8,000 tickets sold. No refunds. The show had a schedule and the schedule didn't bend. Michael turned back to the crowd. The second verse started. He sang the melody, but now he had to choose where to place it, on top of the band's original key or down with the sagging tape. If he followed the tape, he'd drift away from the live drums. If he stayed with the band, the backing vocals on the recording would clash against his voice. Either way, the music would split in two. But here's what nobody saw coming. The audience started to notice. Heads tilted, arms folded. The kind of micro-movements that said something's off. People didn't need to know music theory to feel when a sound turned wrong. He made his choice. He'd follow the tape down and bring the band with him. Michael slowed his phrasing. Not much, just enough to pull against the drums. He sang behind the beat, let his voice drag and watched the drummer's face. The drummer caught it first, frowned, eased off the hi-hat. The bass player followed. The rhythm section started to sag, matching the tape's new tempo. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't tight, but it kept the song from tearing apart. The monitor wedge crackled once, a dry pop of static, and Michael smelled the faint burn of overheated transformer coil. The sound tech finally looked up. Too late to stop it. Too late to swap the reel. The engineer's hand hovered over the fader but didn't move. Pulling the track mid-song would leave the band naked, and a silent stage in front of 8,000 people was worse than a broken one. Michael hit the chorus, and the crowd clapped along. They didn't know the pitch had dropped. They didn't know the tempo had become a negotiation between 5 musicians and a dying machine. They only knew the song kept moving, and the kid at the front still looked like he meant every word. Wait, notice what just shifted. The tape deck's capstan roller, worn after 2 months of nightly shows, finally lost its grip. The motor whined. The take-up reel spun free for a fraction of a second and the entire instrumental track lurched. Strings bent, horns warped. The percussion loop smeared into a low groan, and for one terrible moment the music sounded like it was melting. Michael stopped singing. His hand went up, a flat palm facing the band. The universal signal for hold. The drummer hit the rim once and went silent. The bass player muted his strings. The guitar tech in the wings reached for a spare cable, thinking the problem was a loose jack. But it wasn't the instruments. It was the machine, and the machine had just declared surrender. The crowd noise dropped, not all at once. It rolled back in waves, starting from the front rows where people could see Michael's face and spreading toward the rear of the hall where confusion moved slower. Within 5 seconds, 8,000 people had gone quiet enough to hear the tape deck's motor grinding against itself. Michael turned to face the wings. The tour manager was already moving, one hand pressed to his headset, the other waving frantically at the monitor engineer. A stagehand in a black shirt sprinted toward the reel-to-reel case. Michael could see the reels still turning, but the sound coming out was no longer music, just a warped hum that cycled lower and lower until it disappeared beneath the range of human hearing. The sound engineer killed the playback feed. The speakers went silent. The band stood frozen, instruments ready, waiting for a cue that hadn't been written into the set list. Michael looked at his brothers. Jermaine's bass hung loose. Tito held his guitar neck like a question. Jackie stood 2 steps back, eyes on Michael, waiting. 1 second, don't skip this part. Michael had 45 seconds until the next song. 45 seconds to decide whether to apologize, restart, or skip ahead. The venue contract said the show ran 90 minutes. They were 18 minutes in. Cutting a song this early meant adding time somewhere else, and the curfew didn't move. But restarting meant explaining, and explaining meant admitting the failure in front of a crowd that had paid to see perfection. He turned back to the audience. No microphone, no script, just a 12-year-old in a glossy black jacket standing under a single white spotlight in the middle of a silent stage. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just waited until the last whisper in the back row faded, and then he spoke. "We're gonna fix that." 3 words, delivered, flat. No apology, no excuse. The crowd stayed quiet. Michael nodded to the band, counted off 4 beats with his hand, and the drummer kicked into the next song. No tape, no backing track, just 5 live instruments and 5 voices. The transition was rough. The horns were gone. The string section existed only in memory, but the rhythm held, and the melody came through. And by the time Michael hit the first chorus, the front row was clapping again. The song wasn't the same. It was smaller, thinner, stripped of the studio polish that Motown had spent weeks building. But it was real, and the crowd leaned into it. Backstage, the stagehand pulled the reel off the machine. The tape had stretched. The oxide coating had started to flake. He turned the capstan roller toward the work light. A deep groove cut into the rubber, worn through 2 months of nightly friction. He ran his thumb across it, and the rubber crumbled. "This is why," he said, holding it up. The tour manager leaned in. The groove was deep enough to catch a fingernail. The roller should have been replaced weeks ago, but road crews ran on schedules and budgets, and small failures accumulated until they weren't small anymore. The manager looked at the worn part, then at the tech. "When did it start?" "Can't say for sure, but that groove doesn't happen overnight." The tour manager stood silent for a moment, then looked toward the stage where the show was still running. A 12-year-old had heard what a daily equipment check had missed. Michael finished the chorus, and the band pushed into the bridge. No crash, no train wreck, just a different shape. The crowd stayed with them, and by the final note, the moment had already started to fade. The house lights came up for a 10-second reset. Michael stepped back from the mic and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. His brothers circled around him. No one spoke. Jermaine nodded once. Tito tapped the headstock of his guitar twice, their shorthand for good call. Jackie just smiled. The moment passed. The lights dropped again. The next song started, but in the wings, the tour manager was still holding the ruined tape. He looked at the monitor engineer, then at the sound tech, then at the stage where a 12-year-old had just made a decision that no one had authorized. The manager's jaw tightened. He turned and walked toward the dressing room hallway, the reel still in his hand. After the show, Michael sat on a road case in the loading dock while the crew broke down the drum kit. The air smelled like diesel and sweat. A truck idled near the rear door. The tour manager came out of the venue office and crossed the dock in 4 strides. He stopped in front of Michael, looked down at him for a long moment, and then crouched so they were eye to eye. "You stopped the song." Michael nodded. "I told you to keep going." Michael nodded again. The manager exhaled through his nose. He set the tape reel on the case beside Michael. The oxide flaked off in tiny brown chips. The plastic film underneath had a visible warp where the heat had bent it. The manager tapped the reel once with his index finger. "How did you know?" Michael looked at the reel, then back at the manager. "Measure 16. The horns dropped first." The manager stared at him. "Measure 16. Not, it sounded weird or something felt off." The kid had counted bars in real time while singing, dancing, and watching 8,000 people. "You were right," the manager said quietly. He stood, turned, and walked back toward the office. Michael sat alone with the broken tape. The truck beeped and pulled away. The door swung shut. Remember this moment, everything turns here. The next night, in Detroit, the tour carried 2 backup tape machines. The sound engineer ran a test reel before doors opened. The monitor tech checked every connection twice. The tour manager stood in the wings during the first song with his arms crossed, watching the reels turn, listening for the drift. It didn't come. The tape ran clean. The show locked tight. Michael sang every note in the center of the pitch, and the crowd never knew how close the night before had come to disaster. But Michael knew, and when the chorus hit and the playback feed stayed true, he glanced stage left and saw the manager nod. Not approval, not praise, just acknowledgement. The kind of silent agreement that said, "We're both watching now." The song ended. The lights dropped. The next track started. And somewhere in the back of the venue, a 12-year-old's decision became part of the way the tour ran from that night forward. No one wrote it down. No one made a rule. It just became understood. If Michael stops, there's a reason. 3 weeks later, in a different venue, a monitor started to feed back during sound check. The engineer reached for the tone controls. Michael held up one hand, walked to the speaker, and crouched beside it. He pointed to a loose audio cable vibrating against the cabinet. The engineer tightened it. The feedback stopped. A 12-year-old's ear had become part of the crew's checklist. Because the night the tape slowed, Michael had proven something every veteran knew, but nobody wanted to say. Sometimes the youngest person in the room hears it first. The tour rolled on, and every night, Michael stood at center stage and waited for the same thing. Silence, then the downbeat, then the moment when everyone locked into the same rhythm. One breath, one beat, one choice, and it held.